Fans of Crazy House Chess, thanks for watching another one of my videos. So this is a special game because I get to show off my anti E4 secret weapon. So it's an opening that I think I came up with. I haven't seen anyone else play it, and it's a nice little anti E4 line. It sacrifice a pawn, but black gets good development, and he kind of puts white on the defensive end, and that's great because having the white pieces is such a big advantage in Crazy House because every move is so critical that flipping the tables a bit and putting white on the defensive and giving black an opportunity to attack is for I think for any black player would be very welcome. Yeah, so it's my special line, and looking forward to sharing it with you, and hopefully you guys like it and try it out in your own games and have success with it. So a little bit more about this game. It was a 3-0 time control, so 3 minutes on each side. We'll actually see the times, how long the how long it took for each player to make each move here, and that'll come up later. It'll be a nice little side. There'll be a nice little side story to that. My opponent was around 2,300, so a fairly strong player. I played this game on leadchess.org, plays a website that has a lot of great Crazy House players and some great Crazy House chess tournaments as well. You could look me up on leadchess.org. My profile name is Maple-Kev, so yeah, check out my my profile there, and you could see a whole bunch of my games. Yeah, and just one little side note. In the previous game, we had there was a promotion to I had a promotion to a queen, and I kind of talked about how I wish it was an under promotion to a knight because that's it's pretty cool. So in this game, there is an under promotion, which is a promotion to any piece other than a queen, and it kind of wins the game for black. So look out for that. All right. So with that being said, let's get started. All right, so e4, d5. So this is just a Scandinavian defense. Pawn takes pawn, and if this was a regular chess game, black could play queen takes d5, or he can play knight f6, and that would just be a typical Scandinavian game. But given that this is Crazy House, black plays e5. So this is kind of my innovation. And the idea is that, if white doesn't take the pawn, black's going to play out the bishop to c5, have a nice target on f2, get really easy development. But typically, white will take the pawn, and the bishop takes e6, and now black just has a really comfortable position. Yeah, he's down a pawn, but he's got good development. White hasn't really developed yet, and he doesn't have any weaknesses, and he might get a chance to go on the offensive at some point. So it's a nice little line. I recommend you try it out. All right, so white plays an unusual move here, queen f3. He's already behind in development, and to now bring the queen out, it's going to be a target. So I don't know, a risky move. So just simple development by black, and now white just makes another risky move, just taking another pawn and making another queen move. So this is, he's kind of, this is definitely a bit dangerous. White does have 3 pawns, but he's very behind in development. And so black just plays knight d7, further improving his development. There's a lot of ways to start to hit the queen, and white's just going to lose even more time with those queen moves. So one way to put these pawns to use is to drop a pawn on c6, and then if black plays knight c5, hitting the queen, well, white can just kind of drop another pawn on d7. You definitely don't want to move the king. So what could you do? You kind of just take, bishop takes d7. And now it's, black's hitting the queen. He's got really good development. It's, this is a very comfortable position for black. If the queen comes back to f3, you could just kind of drop a pawn on e4. And, black's got a really good position here. Okay. So white didn't play that. Instead, he played queen b5. I guess maybe looking to drop a pawn on b7, or just wanting to bring the queen back into the game. I don't know, but it gives black another free move to attack the queen with rook b8. And now white plays another queen move, and black brings the bishop out, hitting that pawn on f2, which, as we know from the last game, is always a weakness in Crazy House. You always have to be very careful about protecting that f2 or f7 pawn. All right, so now white kind of has a free move. So he could have played something like pawn e3, just kind of blunting the diagonal, in which case black could simply castle d4, and it doesn't even care about the bishop. Just play something like rook e8, D takes, knight takes c5, hitting the queen. And black's got a really comfortable position here. The rook's got a bit of a, veiled attack on the king. So this is just a really comfortable position for black. All right, so that's not what happened in the game, though. In the game, white, used one of his pawns to drop on h6. I guess the idea being here that he's hoping that black is going to, take the pawn, drop a pawn on g7, and maybe lose a little bit of time, which could give white a chance to, shore up his defenses a bit. So, it's possible. And that's what I played. I did take the pawn on h6. That being said, this was an opportunity for black to just start the attack with bishop f2. Knight g4 check, and now white kind of has a conundrum here. What does he do? He could move the king, but let's look at queen takes g4, because this is a queen sacrifice like this is very typical in Crazyhouse. One, white gets a knight out of it. Second point is that he often gets, after the queen is captured, he gets a free move, and this free move is h takes g7, which looks pretty dangerous. He's hitting the pawn on, he's hitting the rook on h8. There's weak squares in black's position. So, I mean, this could lead to something. But white's development is so poor here, and his king is exposed that really there's nothing here. Queen f6, hitting the king and the pawn. So a nice little fork there. Drop a pawn on f3, queen takes g7, and black is just completely winning here. He's got an extra queen. White's king is exposed. White still has very little development. This is just a winning position for black. And he's pretty safe here, because white doesn't have any material right now on the board to do anything to black's king. All right, so queen takes g4, which is a potential idea in other positions, doesn't quite work here. So what if white plays king e2? If he plays the king to e1, black just drops a pawn on f2, forking the king and the knight. So on something like king e2, black could take the pawn, free pawn, and maintain his pawn structure. But at the same time, white has very little development. Black can just castle, get the king out of the middle, bring the rook to e8, and now you have a really nasty discovered attack on the white king. This is dangerous, sure, but white has no material to really play here. And this knight is actually doing a pretty good job of guarding both squares. So there's really nothing to be scared of here. White's development is so poor and his king is so exposed. He has no attack here. He can drop a pawn on e3 to just kind of blunt the e file. But black can just play knight c5, hitting the queen. Something like queen f4, and now drop a pawn on d3, and black is absolutely crushing here. Okay, so yeah, bishop f2 would have been a good alternative, and would have been a strong move to play in this position. Okay, so black took the pawn on h6, and then white took this opportunity to shore up his defenses a bit, blunt the bishop on f2. And black decided to also drop a pawn on g7, preventing white from dropping here, protecting the g7 pawn. That's a solid move. All right, so here we have d4, and then simply castle kingside. We've seen this before. Pawn takes bishop, knight takes pawn, attacking the queen. So in this position, the queen went to a3, which gives black an opportunity to just drop another piece and hit the queen. Also, this pawn is covering this a3 and c3 square, so it's a nice, useful move. Forces the queen to move again, and so white takes the pawn on a7. So white, picks up another pawn, but his queen is completely out of the game. There's going to be a lot going on in the middle of the board, and the queen's just going to be out of it. So this is pretty dangerous for white, especially after a move like knight f e4, because now there's a threat to take on f2. And there's going to be action on c3 and d2. So this is white has some problems here. So he has some problems, but he has a free move. So what to play? So one option would have been to drop a bishop on g3. If you remember the last game, there was a lot of the game was about black just kind of preventing white trying to prevent black from dropping a bishop on g6. If you remember in that game, that bishop did a good job of protecting the pawn on f7, and it was really active on this diagonal. So that's so kind of the same thing here. This bishop does a good job protecting this pawn on f2, and there's some things happening on this diagonal. But these positions are very different from the last game and this game. And here, what black has this opportunity to just kind of drop a pawn on c3 with some really nasty things going on here. And this bishop really doesn't do anything to protect this the queen side here. So c3 is a really strong move. So again, white has a couple of options. If he were to take this pawn on c7 to be, really, really greedy, okay, so here are some ideas. Black can take this pawn, deflects the bishop from the d2 square, and now allows a pawn drop on d2. All right, so if the king comes to e2, I mean, this is just going to be, whoops, whoops. This is just going to be, it's just going to be mate on d1. So that's obviously not good. Now, if the king goes to d1, well, that doesn't really help much either because the knight comes to f2, deflecting the king from d1, and then again we get that crushing position. So that's what happens on something like bishop takes c7. Yeah, white would be better off, playing something like dropping a pawn on d4, kind of blocking the queen's the d file. Here too, though, same kind of idea. C takes b2, bishop takes b2. You can't drop a pawn on d2, but you can drop a pawn on c3. And now white has nothing better than bishop c1. And now you really want to drop a pawn on b2. It would just be a crushing move. You don't have a pawn, but you have many ways of getting one. So really, you'll pretty much sacrifice any piece for a pawn here. And so a good move would just be to play, knight takes f2. Create weaknesses around the king. You pick up your pawn. If black takes this knight with either the bishop or the king, black's going to drop a pawn on b2. King takes f2. You could play knight to e4 check first, and then no matter what white plays, you're going to drop a pawn on b2, and that's just going to be a very crushing position. All right, so that's what happens if you take the knight. An alternative is for white to just take this knight, kind of brings the queen back into the game. But I mean, it's, maybe also supports the e7 square. But still, I mean, black's going to drop a pawn on b2. And, white takes advantage of his queen's position to drop a pawn on e7 with, nasty threats on the queen and the rook. So this is, this is a really strong move. And in most positions, this would be a very strong move. But here it's not enough because black has this, really nasty check. And, king takes f2, and then black can drop a bishop on e1 check. If the king were to come to f3, then, black can just play something like queen d5, and any queen exchange is going to be in black's favor because white's king is so exposed. Okay, so instead of king f3, if white tried to play something like king e2, well, black can first take the pawn, pick up a pawn. Yeah, sure, he loses his queen, but the important thing here is not the queen, but the position of white's king. And so, black can just play queen takes c2 here. And, this square is heavily guarded. If black were to interpose, if white were to interpose here with a piece, black could easily just take it. Where does the king go? If the king goes to f3, then there's a mate in 2. Drop a pawn on g4, king f4, and queen f5 is just mate. So that doesn't work. Now, if the king takes the bishop on e1, then black can drop a pawn on d2 check. King comes to f2, and here we go. Here's our first under promotion with a knight. You get a nasty double check here. That means that the king has to move. So let's say the king goes to e1. King f3 would just be the same mating idea before with the pawn at g4 and queen on f5. Now you can drop a pawn on f2. This is forced. And now black has an extra bishop. Black has a bishop to drop, and here you could just drop a bishop and then take king c1, and you could even drop a pawn on b2, and that's mate. So just a really, really nasty attack here. Okay, so that was the bishop g3 line, right? So in this position, that was bishop g3. Okay. What about an alternative? What about something like dropping a pawn on d3? Again, blunting the d file. Maybe attacking the knight on e4. So what happens here? Okay, well, it's the same idea. Drop the pawn on c3. Again, threatening to take the pawn on b2 and just trying to come into this into these dark squares here. All right, so here's an alternative. White can play something like bishop e5, just kind of supporting that b2 square where all the action is going to be for the next few moves. All the action is going to be around here. All right, so black takes the pawn, and then we have this bishop captures the pawn, and then you drop a pawn on c3 again. Now white could probably sacrifice on c3, but he could also maybe try something like bishop c1. And now, I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities here. Black can take this this pawn on f2, but there's also this idea here of playing, pawn to b3, and this is another way to pick up that pawn to drop on b2. So here we go. A takes b3, knight takes b3, c takes b3, and again, you just keep attacking. Black just keeps relentlessly attacking. You don't want to give white any chance to catch his breath and try to do any stuff here. All right, so bishop takes b2, c takes, bishop takes, and black just keeps up the pressure. White, you want to keep up the pressure as much as possible in Crazyhouse all the time. All right, so now black's threatening to take this bishop. White's king is completely exposed. He has material, but he needs time to drop the material, and that's just the thing that white just doesn't have time. He's put under so much pressure. So white can play this move, bishop takes g7. It's a nice move, kind of exposing the king, maybe setting up some future possibilities. But it's just too slow. Black's attack is too strong. Rook takes b1, rook takes b1, and now you can drop a pawn on d2. Really nasty pawn, just one square away from queening. All right, so what happens now? If black tries something like king d1, well, you have nasty checks here on c3 with a knight. But before you do that, it could be good to take the c2 escape square away from the king. And that's why a move like bishop b3 is nice, because it kind of takes that square away and it boxes the king in, where he's in a lot of trouble here. Okay, so you don't want to really move the king. You have all these pawns. Drop a pawn on c2. But again, so now the king is just boxed in really badly. So now you can drop a knight on c3, and this is just really, really dangerous. So white has no choice. He has to take the knight check, and king takes d2. It's pretty much all forced. And now you get to pick up this rook with check. So now the king is completely exposed. All right, so now maybe white can play something like king e2. Okay, so black has a lot of material. Well, he doesn't have a lot of material, but he has some material, and white's king is completely exposed. So where is there a win here? You could drop a rook on d2, and then the king would either go to e1 or f3, and you'd have to figure out, do you have enough material? Yeah, this could get dangerous for black. And then, of course, there's just this queen sack here, and that's the thing with Crazyhouse. Every forcing move has to be assessed, and this turns out to be a really, really strong move. All right, so queen takes d3. Obviously, the queen has to be captured. If he captures with the pawn, then what this does is it opens this diagonal for the bishop, and that allows black to play bishop d1, which is really nasty because it takes the f3 square away from the king. Ideally, the king would kind of come up here and just kind of escape, but bishop d1 takes that f3 square away. King e1 is forced, and now here you have, just a simple mate. So that's what happens when pawn takes d3. Okay, so what happens if king takes d3? Now the king is kind of running into the middle of the board, and where he's going to be more exposed to black's pieces. So here you could drop a rook on d2, and white's forced to go out into the middle of the board where all of black's pieces are waiting. So king e4. Now you can instead you bring this bishop back into the game with check. King could go to e5, but then you probably just be able to play f6 and then continue as in the game. So instead of that, king can come to f4, and now black can drop a bishop on g5, and it's going to be mate next move. If king e5, then you have f6 mate, and if the king goes to g3, then you can drop a pawn on h4 mate. So yeah, really, really nasty. I mean, queen takes d3. You'd never see it in a regular game, but that's the beauty of Crazyhouse. You can play these incredible queen sacrifices, and they win the game. And so black he needed all of his material, but in the end he got the king. So yeah, a pretty awesome line. Okay, so we looked at bishop g3, we looked at pawn d3. Let's look at the game. White played a bishop White dropped a bishop on f3, so that was the move in the game. Okay, so what does black do here? Well, in the game, kind of just dropped a pawn on g4, hitting the bishop, and a useful pawn to have, kind of controlling these squares. Bishop takes knight, knight takes bishop. So now black has a bishop to drop, white has a knight and 2 pawns. He has a free move here. What does white do? Maybe he could play something like bishop d3, attacking the knight, kind of blunting the queen's, blunting the d file. In this case, though, black just plays the typical knight takes f2, king takes f2, and now he uses that bishop that he just picked up to play something like bishop b6. This is a really nasty bishop. He's hitting the queen. It's got this, pinning the pawn on e3 hit with a veiled threat on the king. This is really nasty. You might want to drop a pawn on f4 at some point, just kind of picking white's position apart and just opening him up for the attack. And so this would be a really, really nasty position for white. Okay. So that would have been something like bishop d3. Now, in the game, white actually dropped the knight on c6, just ignoring his king safety and just, trying to put pressure on black, maybe even drop a pawn on e7 with that nasty, that nasty fork. An aggressive move. And, but, Black doesn't care about his queen. He just keeps attacking with knight f2, opening up the king more, maybe threatening the rook, maybe bringing the queen to d1, like who knows. So in this position, if white takes the knight, then again we have this bishop drop, this nasty bishop drop, hitting the queen and also hitting the king. So if in this position, if the knight takes the queen, then black can take white's queen, and then if white were to play something like knight c6, protecting the knight, hitting that nasty bishop, black can just drop a queen on f5, and white really doesn't have any good moves. His king's under attack, his pawn is under attack. He doesn't have a lot of great options here. One possibility is to maybe drop a pawn on f4. Now, black could take this pawn with check because that pawn can't move; it's pinned. But even better would just be to take this pawn on c2 with check. If white plays something like knight d2, then you have bishop takes e3, king takes e3, and just bring the rook to e8. Just a simple, calm move. You have a nice discovered check on the king. White's king is completely exposed, and black's actually threatening to take this knight on c6. And it's just a really, really good position for black. This is definitely winning. Okay, so we were just looking at king takes f2 and bishop b6. So that's not what happened in the game. In the game, white took the queen. Okay, so now it's black's move, and now it's a great time to take the rook. This is a great move because now you pick up a rook, which is nice, but even more important, you have that pawn on f2 to drop. That's a really strong threat right now. That would be very nasty because it would be check, pick up the knight, and then you could promote to a queen. And so really, really nasty threat. All right, so if white were to drop a pawn on f2, then black can take the opportunity to now also pick up the knight. And look at all the material black has. I mean, white's king is completely exposed. He has no development. Black has so much material. He has a queen, but what's he going to do with that queen? Black has very few weaknesses. So it's just a really strong crushing position. There's a threat to drop a rook on d1. This is really, really good for black. So that's what happens if white were to plug the hole on f2 with a pawn. It would give black time to pick up that knight. But white, in keeping with his style, he just keeps being aggressive and drops a pawn on e7. This is a really nasty threat because this rook, the king would have to recapture. and this would just be a winning attack for white. Now, so now black has to figure out, okay, how's he going to play this? All right, so this is a pretty obvious move, right? Drop a pawn on f2 with check and threaten the knight. Okay, so white played a king d2 here, and now black really wants to draw the king to e2, because if he draws the king to e2, then maybe he could take this knight with check. So that's the idea here. So black played in this position. He dropped the bishop on e1. You know, just trying to get the king to go to e2, right? Trying to entice the king to e2. All right. So in the game, the king did in fact go to e2. But what would happen on king d1? King d1 here. In this position, black could have played something like rook d7 check, dropping the rook on d7. And now white doesn't have a lot of good ways of interposing here. If you were to play something like queen d4, you know, hoping to maybe pick up the rook and maintain this threat on the f8 rook, well, black could probably just play something like rook b takes d8, and then if you know, white were to take the rook on f8, then black could maybe just take the rook again, and black just has a really good position. His king is safe. The white king is completely exposed. This knight's going to get picked up. This is just a really crushing position for black. Yeah. So that's what would have happened on king d1. You know, drop a rook on d7. So in the game, white played king e2. Okay. So here's a little bit of some background here. So in the game, I had 1:20 left, and obviously I wanted to take the knight and promote it to a knight with check. The problem is that oftentimes in these online chess platforms, the settings are such that you automatically queen. So when you get a pawn to the 8th rank, you automatically make a queen. And if I had made a queen, if I had taken the knight and made a queen, this is what would have happened. Knight takes pawn. So pawn takes knight with a queen. White's king is not in check. So what does that lead to? It leads to this. E takes f8. King has to take it, and then white can drop a pawn on e7. King takes e7. Knight c6, and maybe you see where this is going. I mean, black's king is completely exposed. If he plays something like king f8, then we have rook h8, drop a rook on h8. Once you block, then it's queen e7 mates. Okay, so that's what would happen if you take the knight with your queen. You give white a chance to launch this like devastating attack. Okay. So I can't let that happen, obviously. Now, I had 1:20 left, so this gave me enough time to go into my preferences and change my settings to change it so that white or I don't automatically queen when I get a pawn to the 8th rank. That's why what you'll see is on this move, 33.6 seconds. It took me about 50 seconds to find my preferences and change the setting. And I'm glad I did, because that turned that turned this into a win as opposed to a loss. So I'm just thankful that I was able to figure that out in less than 1:20. Okay, so here we are. Under promotion to a knight, the knight is attacking the king with check. So the attack continues, and white never gets a chance to take this rook with check. Yeah. So let's keep going. All right. So what does white play? So in the game, white took the bishop on e1. What if he played something like king d3, just trying to escape? Well, there's no escape here because, you know, these knights are killer. The knight comes to f2. Now the king has to go to d4. And now you drop a knight on e2. You just have these knights are everywhere. It's nasty. Bishop takes e2. Knight takes e2 check. The king, you know, if the king goes to e5, there will be a mate. And if the king goes to c5, well, there's a mate with the rook on c4. So a nice little mate there. Again, these knights just completely devastating. All right, so that's what happens on king d3. So let's go back. to this position. So instead of king d3, what if white took the, like, let's go back to the game, and in the game white took the bishop. Okay, so here drop a knight on f3. Okay, and pawn takes, knight takes. Now where does the king go? He pretty much can only go to e2 or d1. So d1, if you went to d1, then that would be mate in 1. Okay, and if he goes to e2, well, you could drop a rook on e1, but that kind of gives black, maybe white can, I don't know, escape somehow. Probably not. But even better in this position, take away the d3 escape square. So play something like bishop c4 check. You take away this escape square. If he drops a piece on d3, then you can mate him on e1 with the rook. Or in the game, the king comes to d1, and now you mate on e1 with the rook. And so black wins by checkmate with 28 seconds to spare. So that was it's a nice. It was a nice game. It was fun to under promote with the knight, and having to go into the preferences to change the settings was just was kind of exciting for me. So I really hope you enjoyed that game. It kind of shows you my secret weapon against e4. And I'm sure I'll have other games to show where I play that d5 e5 line and manage to pull out a win. All right. Well, thanks for watching. Leave comments below, or send me your games or recommendations to the email. Check me out on leechess.org, and hopefully I'll have another game for you soon. All right. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.